Hello everybody, welcome to SETI's Enchanted Technology Summer Festival 2022. This is the beginning of 5 weeks of institutes and workshops and speakers, and ending, hopefully, in a series of interesting collaborative projects and a show, and ending eventually as a prototype for our year-long projects that we want to do, that we'll talk about, that will be out in the city, including a fully painted interactive mural wall in a couple places in the city, so this will be like building up to that, and a beautiful augmented reality like tours and site-specific experiences we're doing over the years. So welcome. I'm going to start with like the most mundane things, and then we'll go into interesting things. On the SETI Google Calendar, we'll put all the workshops and streams so you can look up and see what's happening. I also I'll also later put a link to a public snapshot so you can look at it, and we'll put links to it.
We will be streaming these workshops. It is definitely a work in progress as we set up in this room with terrible acoustics and so on and so forth to stream these workshops. The things that I would call out as maybe even a bit more important or more interesting are some of the talks and panels that we're going to be doing as part of this, with both folks here in town and remote people who are like experts in these fields and doing amazing things in these realms. And so I would say it's a great resource to like just hear them talk. And we will be scheduling for some of those remote talks, live StreamYard talks that will be scheduled in advance on YouTube. And I would encourage you to try to join the live stream session, because it gives you an opportunity to join the chat and ask questions to these people. So we did some last year. We also had a series earlier this year with some really amazing speakers, and it was kind of like a privilege to have them, and a great opportunity to just sort of ask them questions. And typically they were very open on questions on the creative process or the technical process. And so it's like a great way to see real world applications of some of these technologies. You know, here for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be kind of playing and experimenting with these things, but I think it's good to recognize and see sort of like what is at the end of the road of these things we're going to start experimenting with, just so you can know like what the future possibilities are. I'm going to talk quickly about a very high level view. I'm sure some of you saw the calendar and saw what some of the speakers are and some of the things will be happening. So really high level, you may be wondering like, what do we even mean by enchanted objects? What technologies are involved? How do we define that term? And I guess I would start with saying that we have a pretty broad term for a lot of the technologies we work with, and that's by design, because I think a lot of us have realized that sort of if you have a certain technology and you view it in a very narrow scope, it's only going to be used in a narrow scope. And I will say for myself and a lot of other people that I've worked with, and in the realm of the kinds of things that I do, the most interesting things happen when you do have a broad view and then can combine two things that seem totally unrelated, or that shouldn't be there. So I will say our enchanted objects is fairly broad. So the more narrow version of that is kind of the realm of sensors, soldering, microcontrollers, like these kinds of technology objects, and we'll talk quite a bit more about these kinds of things. But the idea of another term for that is physical computing, is making objects yourself, whether they're art objects and sculptures, or whether they're useful, usable objects that have some embedded technology, whether it's like really sophisticated digital circuitry and sensors, or very simple analog sensors to make a fun sound. Like there's a huge realm of possibilities, and some of the things we will, especially this first week, be endeavoring to do is to show you some of those possibilities, because it's not something that fits on a slide, and it's not something that fits into one talk. We also are including in our definition of enchanted objects augmented reality objects, where you have a physical object that exists in the world and then add an additional augmented layer to it. So we'll have Stephen Christian here for a few workshops this week, super talented, just lovely person, and he will be doing some workshops kind of stemming from some of the artwork he does himself. He's a visual artist and cartoonist and illustrator, and among many other things, and you will see some of his work, but just also including that definition of, a static object that is suddenly brought to life by augmented reality. We'll be touching on that this week, certainly, but in a few weeks we will have an institute that is more focused on augmented storytelling, that is a bit more focused on that specific realm. We'll also have, kind of back in that top physical tangible object realm, 3D printing and other fabrication techniques. So you can see in the lab we have lots of little machines and devices over there, and so we will be talking about, Miguel will be doing a 3D printing workshop. I think Sean will be here next week, and I'll be helping out with some other like assembly and fabrication and talking about tools and materials and that kind of thing. Also, soft circuits and digital crafts. So it's very easy to think of technology as like all of this garbage, all of this like plastic and cables and glass and metal, but it doesn't have to be. You know, it can be warm, tangible materials that humans like. It can be made of wood. It can be made of fabric. And so we have some. In here, we have a digital embroidery machine, and there's more of that on the floor. We have so much thread from an e-textiles workshop we did last week, and we have some microcontrollers that are really geared towards that, like wearables and e-textiles and that kind of thing. So the definition doesn't have to be sort of like the traditional, you know, resistors on a breadboard. There's much more flexibility in that, in our definition of it. And then even to just blow things even wider open, we will have some projection mapping later this week with the idea of being a wall is an object, and very often we have these static white walls, this floor is full of them, and you have the ability to project something on it and turn that static object into a lens to another world or bring it to life in different ways. So that's something we'll be talking about. Stephen Lee, I believe, is it Thursday or Friday? Later this week.
Thursday evening will be the projection mapping workshop. Bring some objects if you want, because the point of projection mapping is also you can project onto a wall, but you can project onto a cube, you can project onto a chair. So you can take your video and project onto an object of your choice and fit it perfectly. So it's not just spilling over, that it's shaped exactly onto your object. So we will have some like weird little cardboard things, but in your fabrication, if you make something, then you can project onto it, you can embed electronics into it. So if you have a video or that you want to play, that you want to project onto strange things, and if you have objects you want to project on, bring them.
Yeah, and then just a final thing that we've included, Aisha will be doing a drone photography workshop next week, and just drones are like their own enchanted objects in their own way, but also she will be talking about and looking about, I mean, partially we'll just play with it because it will be fun, but there's been some pretty amazing work done of using, you know, I'm sure some of you have seen this in recent years, like fleets of drones flying in the sky with LEDs to sort of make these light sculptures in the sky. So our light sculptures will be limited to one drone, but it's a starting point to experiment with, and you can kind of learn about that realm. And then again, as part of that augmented storytelling, in a few weeks, there'll be a bit more of a focus on that. And I should say, for the projection mapping, we'll do kind of an introduction to that over the next 2 weeks, but the Interactive Murals Institute later in the summer will be a bit more of a focus on that realm. So you'll get kind of a taste of it now, and then more of a deliberate focus, and then lots of other things. And hopefully the much more also includes things that you want to do, or things you're interested in, or things you want to experiment with. We've really worked to like outfit the lab with lots of things that we think are interesting. If there are things that we are missing that you think would be interesting, you should let us know and we can get those things. Or we can show you that, well, we have this and it kind of does that thing. And so, yeah, there's so much of what will kind of, you know, our ambitions for this is like the outcomes of this are dependent on your ideas and your creativity and your participation. And so just keep in mind that this is not like, there's so little rigidity here for what seems interesting. And so, do you want to do this one?
Yeah.
You can tell we rehearsed this very carefully.
Yeah. Is there a tools one, or you want to talk about that?
I can jump to this one. I'm glad to. Okay, I'll jump straight into this. And so speaking of the lab that you're in, so this is our lab space. We do have access to some other spaces through PSU that we'll maybe talk about a little more when we talk about kind of the tour of the floor. But just as far as what's available in here, just to start like sparking some ideas, hopefully. So as I mentioned, we have a 3D printer here. Miguel, who I think will be here later this afternoon, is an expert in that field. And so if you have any 3D printing questions, he's very enthusiastic about talking about 3D printing. We also have a vinyl cutter. We have two, in fact, of large, we have that large format Roland. We also have this smaller Silhouette. And that smaller one's cool because it actually can do a lot more than cut vinyl. It can cut other things. It can cut paper. It can score paper. You can make stickers. And so it's a really versatile object just to experiment with and see what is possible with it. And as I mentioned, showing in digital embroidery. Over in that corner, and it will kind of spill out when we actually do these workshops, we have kind of soldering, prototyping equipment. We also have mini cabinets of many sort of standard analog circuit components, every resistor hopefully that you want, every capacitor hopefully that you want, and almost infinite supply of LEDs, which is last year we had no LEDs somehow, and now we have an embarrassment of LEDs. And that includes both just very standard, your traditional, whatever those are, 5mm LEDs. We also have lots of very fancy addressable LEDs from Adafruit. And as I mentioned, that realm is something Miguel is also very focused on. So he'll be doing a soldering workshop, but again, those things are available, and we also have kind of more sophisticated sensors at the other end of the spectrum. So we have kind of those basic components, but then some other things. And then we also have things that are like, if you're just overwhelmed with the complexity of building a circuit, we have fun little toys like the Makey Makey, which is a fun device to get into like physical interactive things without fully diving into like the basics of electrical engineering. And so we'll have these out to play with as well over the next 2 weeks. We also have lots of things for capturing objects, like 3D scanners, 360 cameras. We have lots of VR and AR equipment. So again, our Enchanted objects definition is quite broad, and so it can include a 3D capture or 3D scan that you then 3D print. We have a lovely, I think that's a cabbage that's got 3D scanned and printed, but those objects that you scan and print could also go into VR AR experiences. We have projectors, projection mapping tools, and then, of course, lots of other tools and equipment. And so we have lots of hand tools and lots of sort of soft craft kinds of tools, lots of crafty things, and so hopefully there's lots of stuff in that realm to play with. Do you want to jump back? Do you want to do?
I wanted to mention, we did get a little button maker in case people we thought about making augmented buttons, so that buttons that could like have stories behind them. We do have lots of microcontrollers of various sorts that you're going to see over the next 2 weeks. But we also have some very low tech. We have conductive thread that you could like hand sew with, so that you can make circuits and wearables and things that produce lights and sounds and things without the high tech. So we'll have a mixture of sort of high-end craft and all of that. And we've got like a whole. We are really excited about this idea of interactive murals. So we got like tons of. We have conductive tape, so you can like put tape onto things to make the circuits rather than like wire, and like conductive fabric, so you can sew. But we also got a ton of conductive paint that we are excited to try, so that when we paint, we can have murals, like large pieces of wood that do things. But I wanted to mention it because it's like, it doesn't all have, the idea is that electronics has gone a long way to not feel like electronics in the 1960s, which is like, you had to spend years figuring it out before you can do it. Now you can hack things very quickly. So we want to play a little bit with materials and experiments as well. And I lost track of where I was, but we were going to go back.
Did you want to do who's here? Just a high level mention some names?
And
do you want to get closer to the mic also?
Oh, yes. Actually, if we click on the schedule,
sure.
I did make a public, hopefully, snapshot of what we had with just the names and not the like, who's doing lunch. But we have some amazing people here, and this is I just put the first institute up. We'll have, probably by the end of this week, we'll have it for all the institute. And we'll go, and I'll let some of the people who are already here introduce themselves instead of me talking about themselves. But Scott, who does all sorts of amazing things, and Scott Garner, you can match the name now on there, but he's going to do lots of things with sort of sensors and microcontrollers, but also later with AR and VR. But later this week is going to, on Thursday morning, do a demo and talk of some of the amazing work you do. So, including interactive murals, and then we'll do the AR and VR later. But you should definitely come to that. Stephen Christian, who does augmented, he has this amazing augmented comic that he's created, but teaches Unity. He's going to be doing focused on AR bookmarks and stickers, and maybe a VR class this week on Wednesday evening. But then later he's going back. He lives in Reno, so he'll do some remote things later. But this week he's here, and we thought, okay, we're going to consider this part of Enchanted Objects because it's too much of an opportunity to not have him here and teach. And he does these really cool comics. Miguel, who you'll meet later, is going to do some soldering and 3D printing, and is like your resource for all things 3D printing. He's built himself a little 3D printer backpack so that he can take it out with him in the world and print. And I'm trying to remember who's here. Helen Lee, who's going to, I'll talk about her later, but she's going to do soft circuits, so sort of next week. Who else is teaching this week?
We have the talk on Friday.
Yeah, Imin Ye, who's this amazing artist who works a lot with paper and materials as professor at Carnegie Mellon. She's doing a remote talk on Friday morning. So Thursday morning, Scott will do a remote talk. Imin will do a remote talk on Friday morning. And those will be streamed, and only streamed. I'm going to stream the Friday morning and Thursday morning from here so that people who are here can join and ask questions. So we might do a sort of weird mix of like stream, but also in the lab sort of thing. But we wanted to do some purely remote things. Stephen Lee, who's a professor at Portland State and an interaction designer, graphic designer, is going to do the projection mapping. He also does a lot of creative coding, and he actually teaches a little bit of Adobe sort of Aero and that kind of thing. Jonathan Odom is at Autodesk, and he's going to do a Fusion 360, so designing in 3D, and those things again can be 3D printed, but they can also be put into VR. The scanner, we have a tiny scanner to scan tiny objects, by tiny I mean like this size, very precisely in the next building. But we have a beautiful thing that looks like a cheap plastic hairdryer scanner here that will scan like people, and we have a turntable for it, like large objects. So if you decide to scan yourself or your pet or something, you can 3D print it, but you can also muck around with it with Fusion 360 and put it into VR, or muck around with it in Unity and put it into VR or Blender or whatever it is. Aisha Kurzos is a photojournalist who works in a lot of like environmental journalism. She's going to teach drone photography, but also how to do interviews, how to do quick photography with your phone later in some of the other institutes so that you can create content to put into your augmented spaces. If you make a button, you can have a like video of yourself talking behind it or something, or a video of something. Justin Patrizzi is going to teach audio synthesis at the end of on Saturday morning next week, and later we'll teach Touch Designer, which is interactive live music and performance. So, and then we'll have a few more people. Craig Winslow, who you might have seen at the Winter Light Festival around town. He's an artist who does a lot of augmented projection mapping. Is now considered augmented reality because you're adding something to something that's there in the world. But he did a project called Ghost Signs that will take these signs that are either faded or almost completely and then augment them with light and light up these signs and have them on these old buildings. But he also worked, he's going to talk about a project he did in Las Vegas to recreate this abandoned neon museum using projection mapping and like lighting everything up. We're going to stream him too, but he's local, so he'll be back later this summer and fall. Yuri Twitchko is also, he works a lot with games, Unity, VR, lots of things with Spark AR, things augmented, things interactive, immersive experiences. So he's going to do things with P5. Later on, for the second two institutes, we're going to do a lot more coding with processing in P5, JavaScript, Unity. So we'll do a little more straight up coding. I think so far that's all it is, but we are still adding people, and we're definitely adding people for the next two workshops. I'm going to talk about mention a few people who talked last year towards the end, and if some of those people seem exciting, well, you should watch their talk, but we could try to get them back to talk again about a different project. So none of them live in Portland, or maybe one does. But we can do remote streaming. And I did want to mention that about the schedule. It's this complete eclectic mixture of things. So we'll have workshops that are like formal. We'll have things that are trainings that are shorter. We'll have remote speakers, and some of them will just give a talk. Some of them will do a show and tell and deconstruct a couple of projects. And the idea is, and some of them will just talk about like how they made something. And sometimes watching somebody who's an expert sort of walk you through something. And my hope is later, we haven't figured this out, but I'd actually love to just live stream somebody working on a project as they're working on it and talking it out, but I don't really know how it's going to, because watching somebody troubleshoot is actually a really good, interesting process. Do you want to go back to the better, like the, yeah, sure. The interesting. So we're going to give you some examples of things you can think about, and then talk a little bit about the last few speakers. So
yeah, so so as Nandini mentioned, we will share this document on the Discord, so we won't exhaustively go through this, but this was just sort of our list, and it's difficult because, again, this is a huge, broad field. There's so many amazing artists, so many amazing projects. So we just grabbed a few. I thought I would talk about a few. Nandini, you can talk about a few. So I wanted to start with Danny Raza, and just in particular as someone that's was very formative for me in this field, and specifically in the realm of, like I was mentioning, the tangible objects, kind of like invisible technology, physical things existing in the world. And this project of his, these early wooden mirrors that he created, if you've never seen them before, they're really stunning. So that is, if you ignore our bad projection color, that would be great, thank you.
Still doesn't change the movement.
These are physical tiles of wood that are mounted on hundreds of small little servos, so that as someone stands in front of it, a computer vision algorithm captures them with the camera, and it creates the lights and darks by actually tilting the wood up or down. So anywhere that you see in this woman's hair or her face that is a dark part of the image, it's because a motor has actually turned a physical piece of wood so that it is in shadow. And any part that you see that is light, like her face or the surrounding area, is because a physical motor has turned it up. And this was one of the projects, if you will hear me talk probably a lot. You'll hear me talk too much during this institute, so I won't go too much into my history, but the work, Danny's work in particular, was very, very formative for me of this realm of magical technology, invisible technology. There's no wires, there's no blinking LEDs. All of this stuff you see in front of me, this nightmare of plastic and horrible design and just every part of it that is not something you really want to be surrounded by as a human. And that 100 years ago, if you had a nice radio console, it at least looked like nice furniture. Now we have all of this, and it doesn't have to be this way. So you will hear me rant about this a lot. But Danny, to me, was someone that was very formative and actually was a deciding factor in where I went to grad school, just so I could study with him. And so I would encourage you to look at his work, and in particular look at his Mirrors series, because they're just astounding. And as Nandini mentioned, we'll be talking about all of these little microcontrollers and tools that in the last 20 years have been created to help people get started in this realm. He was, I think the first Arduino was 2003, and I think the first wood mirror was 2009. So he's been there the whole time, and was even a little bit ahead of the curve as far as figuring out and making these things possible in the world. And so his work is truly incredible. And just to quickly point through, scroll through some of his other mirrors, because they're all amazing. So that was that first wooden mirror. There's a few around the country. There's one at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. There's one at ITP in New York. If you ever get the chance to see Danny Raza's work, it's astounding. He has another one that it was the exact same concept, but it was made of trash. And so again, it's light hitting trash based on it being facing up or down. The shiny balls, I can't actually remember if that one was light. There was a point where he transitioned into not just relying on the light and shadow. So he had some that were objects that just based on their actual orientation in space had some different appearance, or they would, these pegs could come in and out. He has some that incorporate things like textiles. He had a mirror made of mirrors. He has, let's see, another favorite of mine. They're all incredible. This one was really amazing. This angles mirror was just sort of almost like the speedometer in your car. Just a little kind of windshield wiper sort of sweepy thing that would reorient based on the picture above it. And again, it's all physical. You're not seeing all of this. And so it's this experience where you walk in like you're in an art gallery, and it's something that you would normally think, well, I'm just going to stand here and look at this sculpture. But the sculpture is responding to you, and it's really amazing. There's a very beautiful one that he had with fans that opened and closed. One of the more recent ones, which is quite silly, was he had one that was made with troll dolls with two different colors of hair, and they would rotate and reorient to create your image with the hair of the troll dolls. So absolutely encourage you to look at his work. Both just his work is amazing, and because I think he embodies the spirit in my mind of this, what can I do? How can I make this work? And as I mentioned, we have this wide definition. So he had the definition of well, I want to be a gallery artist. I'm interested in working with materials. He has a background as an industrial designer. I think I can figure out how to make these motors work. I can probably do this, the programming of the microcontroller. I can figure out the computer vision. So just that one mere project has electronics, it has like actuators like motors, it has computer vision, it has all of these pieces that he was able to put together, and you don't even see that technology, you just have this magical moment. So he really embodies that for me. Sorry, I just want to gush about Danny. I should probably move on more quickly. Now I want to talk about a local artist. So that's Danny. He's like very long-term aspirational artist, but a local artist, Darcy Neal, also amazing, works in Portland. She participated in eTextiles last year. You will see her around if you're in this world. And I wanted to point her out because she's in kind of another corner of the world that uses the same kinds of technology, but in totally different applications. So some of my favorite work that she has worked on are she's also a musician and works, in the realm of kind of engineering and prototyping and electronics, but also music synthesis. And some of my favorite works that she's done have sometimes been for artists like Wayne Coyne of the Flaming Lips, for example. And so she made this kind of crazy instrument for him to use as part of his performance. And so I won't play the video, one, because I don't think the stream will deal well with the speakers and everything, also because it's just cacophonous because it's a live video capture, but I would encourage you to watch it because it is a light reactive instrument that Wayne Coyne of the Flaming Lips was able to play with an experiment on stage by holding a light source in his hand. And so it was a way she created this object. It's an interesting object just sculpturally and aesthetically. At the ends of these little tendrils are photocells, and that's something we'll be talking about. It's a way to measure the intensity of light in a circuit. But she was able to make it part of a performance. And it's pretty interesting to see the range of everything involved here, because once again, looking at this, it's like a sophisticated piece of electronics, right? There's work done here. There's careful prototyping and circuitry design. There's also kind of wild, fun, ridiculous sculpture to make it an interesting object. And then there's this whole aspect of a performance that goes around it. And it's also a musical instrument. So again, it's the places that I get really excited about in this realm are at intersections of things. And this term, I don't know, I don't even want to say it, but I'll say it. That thing that's at the intersection of art and technology is such a pat thing to say at this point. But I think there's something true to that about the opportunities if you start to put these things together in ways that people maybe haven't thought about. And just one more punctuation point on the end of that statement, I think something that I hope each of you will find is that you have your own realms of expertise, your own realms of interest that you're already interested in. And I think you may find oh, well, how does that cross with this? I'm really interested in bird watching. How does that intersect? Or I'm really interested, I like to power wash my driveway or whatever. How do you find ways to mix that in here? Because that is where incredible things often happen. And just speaking a little bit more on the musical instrument part, because that is also a world that I'm really interested in. This isn't an individual artist because I didn't know who to pick individually, but there's a whole festival called NIME that focuses on new interfaces for musical expression. And for any of you that are musicians or are interested in that world, just looking at the history of the work that has been done here, I think this year it's actually remote once again. It may be going on now, or just finished recently. But I'll just play this video and mute it just so you can not even hear the music, but just see the things that people are doing with their bodies and with objects to make music. And so some of them are very sophisticated, this interesting percussive light up drum kit, some sort of electric didgeridoo, some kind of like a water synthesizer, playing rays of light. And so I think that is for me one of those intersections that I'm really excited about is the music and technology part, and I'm sure you will hear me talking about that in the next few weeks. But so not to say you should only be interested in the music intersection part. You should find those pieces that align for you with the things you are interested in. And then I think I had one more that I wanted to talk about, and then I will hand it over to Nandini. But the Design.io is a company that was founded by, I always get her last name wrong. I think it is Emily Gobiel and Theo Watson. And going back to that enchanted objects as sort of an enchanted space or an enchanted environment, they do really beautiful, very often immersive projection experiences that have a... Oh no, that was so loud. I'm sorry. It's Vimeo, and I didn't mute Vimeo yet. My apologies. So I will talk here. So, your body becomes the enchanted object in some ways. The blank, boring wall becomes the enchanted object. The materials and things like the little creations, the plant life around, all of those things are also, we're including all of that in our definition. And I will say, again, this kind of thing is maybe a bit more what we were going to focus on a little more directly as part of interactive murals, but we'll be starting with this. You'll start to at least be exposed to some of the individual skills and pieces that go into this, whether it's with, I think they actually use open frameworks, but for example, Stephen Christian talking about Unity, Stephen Lee talking about projection mapping, Yuri talking about shaders and effects and things, all of those things you can start to put together, add a little computer vision, and then you have these beautiful immersive experiences. And all of their work is gorgeous. And I guess one of the reasons I am really drawn to them is this is more common now, which I think is great to an extent, like this kind of thing of this immersive projection thing. But again, thinking a little bit historically and looking who are the people that were really making this happen. I really think of that team as some of the first people that really were doing this kind of work at this scale in this way, especially as, good grief, every time. I apologize. Very exciting music. These guys, you still didn't mute all the way, did you? Okay. One day we'll get the AV all figured out. But this was a full projection on the walls, floors, on different objects for kids to play in. And so, and you can see there's physical objects that are incorporated into this experience. You can move these physical blocks around and have them detected by a computer vision algorithm and interrupt the flow of water. And so, again, these are sort of end of the road, seeing what's possible. What are the people who sort of really dedicate to themselves to this and really get into it? These are the things they create, but the pieces of this are somewhat accessible. There's pieces of this where it's a piece you can bite off and be well, I like the music part, or I like the computer vision part, or I like the projection part. And so we just wanted to share some of those examples. I don't know if we need to go through everybody. Nandini, do you want to pick a few to talk about?
I want to mention a couple, and then I wanted to, actually, I don't know if this is a good Kelly Anderson video, but Kelly Anderson, we might have her come and talk too, but does a lot of really cool projects around paper engineering. So it's not about sort of electronic technology, but it's about doing really interesting things about making paper move. She has this book called This Book is a Planetarium, where you can so, and it is fabrication. There's a lot of laser cutting involved, there's a lot of pop-up, there's a lot of, and we might make a sort of automatic pop-up things. But I would definitely recommend sort of watching some of her talks on how to make some things, and I'll put links to specific things. But yeah, lots of things about how you actually can just do sort of paper pullouts, paper pop-ups, paper automatically folding into things. Lots of interesting sort of uses of origami folds, and then a paper sort of planetarium where you just put a little LED light into it or a flashlight and it works. She had one which she made a record for her friend's wedding, and it was basically an invitation card, but as you opened it, you could move a thing around and it would actually play a song. But I want to actually go back. Scott talked a lot about enchanted technology in the context of it just being wondrous and delightful. I want to talk about a little bit about enchanted technology as being this sort of thing that's creepy a little, sort of surveillance and control and strange and these hidden sort of agendas. So I want to talk, Simon Weckard, who did this really cool project of Google Map Packs, which tells you how much traffic there is based on what it seems like it knows, but what it's really looking at is everybody's phone location data and seeing how fast it's moving. So he took a series of phones and put it into a little wagon and walked it around, and it thought there was a huge pile of cars and a traffic jam. So this idea of also revealing what technology exists in the world around us and what people are using it for in strange, bizarre ways. So I think there's a role that both art and technology, and people with imagination can do. It's taking something made for one purpose and hacking it to do sort of the opposite, which is revealing sort of that Google is watching your location data. And they're using it sometimes for good reasons, but they're also collecting a lot of it and selling it. And on that same note, maybe I'll go to Aphrodite Sarah, who's a local, she's at the University of Washington, and she does some very, very strange things with e-textiles and electronics. There's a project from maybe a couple of years ago, where she makes an Emf Detecting Cloak. So it's basically a dress that captures what are electric fields, what are Wi-Fi networks. Like, she does a series of things of capturing strange other things. But she does a lot of things with conductive textiles and projects on revealing the amount of sort of electronics around us, electromagnetic fields around us, radiation. Not as like necessarily that it's a bad thing, but it's that this is part of our world now, and we're just not aware of all of this invisible sort of technology that's present. And on that same note, I'm going to jump back and go to Adam Harvey, who does much more directly sort of anti-surveillance fashion. So given the number of surveillance cameras, they're like license plate readers, and you can make costumes. I'm a cryptographer, so my interest is more in like the things trying to gather information from you, and how can you either prevent that from happening or muck around with it and give them a lot of noise. So like making fashion that is that confuses, and we'll do maybe a machine learning workshop later in one of the augmented realities, but this fall or next spring, we'll do an intensive institute on that called the treachery of images, of how to counter machine learning algorithms that are image recognition things. Mostly also, that makes them, if they want to actually do that, they should design them so you can't counter them so easily. But this idea of revealing, again, the presence of so much technology around us that's capturing image data, that's capturing whatever. There are a series of artists who work in this field of like costumes, masks, makeup, hairstyles that counter surveillance. And so I think of Enchanted that way too, that hacking systems that are gathering information by like subverting a little bit of what that information is. And we have links to all of these so you can play on some of these. But I also wanted to mention some of the speakers we had last year, and to see if, again, Aphrodite is just in Seattle. We're probably going to do some sort of e-textiles wearables institute this fall for Portland Textile Month in October, and hopefully, and hope she's coming down then. Sophie Wong is another graphic designer in Seattle. We put a link both to her YouTube, on our YouTube site of her talk last year. She gave this amazing talk on a 3D printed dress. But actually, she's done, she has LED manicures, the spacesuit, the first one, and then on interactive light things. But the spacesuit, she started before on some of this, she did fully fabricated a spacesuit. But the cool part is figuring out how to get it to light up and not just be boiling hot. So every piece of this is like 3D printed, laser cut. All of this, so it's very hands-on fabrication. She makes lots and lots of interesting costumes for Comic-Con. She goes to Comic-Con every year. This is her thing. Jorbon Moss, Kitty Young makes, she's a quantum physics researcher at Microsoft actually, and in her spare time she runs the site called Art by Physicist, and does a lot of really cool wearable tech, and including a dress with a video panel on it that you can like play with a remote and things like that. A cloak that has a solar panel so it heats itself. But also this, there's a lot of like a critical look at fast fashion and fashion that's just like aesthetics rather than functional. Again, LED dresses with constellations on it. Interesting things like that, but talking about the video panel is something that's interesting to me, not because I want to wear dresses with video panels on it, but it is actually, if you think about it, that's how you would make an invisibility cloak. If you can have a webcam capturing what's in front of you and a panel behind you, sort of flipping it and playing it. That is like the simplest, cheapest hack of an invisibility cloak. So that was interesting to me because of that. Nobody seems to try it. I was like, that was the first thing I would do with it, is make myself an invisibility cloak. But yeah. Jorvan Moss takes broken toys. He spoke last year too. So any of these people, if you want to have them back and talk, we can do a remote speaker, so tell us. He takes broken Disney toys and makes wearable robots that sort of sit on his shoulders as sort of headdresses or scarves and kind of talk to him. And so, but it's also, again, this, you notice this theme of repair and reuse, and it's very much this hacker mindset of like, can we take existing technology and do something really creative and revealing and interesting with it? And then the last person maybe I'll talk about is Curtail. She's here. She's recently a professor at BCC, but she's decided to leave and become an artist. And the interesting project I want to talk about her is, I don't know if it's on her website, is the one with plants.
We have to wait for Safari to crash, and then we...
But Crystal did this, she's a sound artist, does lots of things with live performance and Max MSP. But the thing with the plants is the sonic blooming. It sort of takes plant data and creates sort of sounds based on that. But it's this very close interaction with sort of collaborating with nature in creating music and sound. And she has a record and an album out of the sonic blooming. But it's measuring sort of, it's not just like how the plant looks or something, but it's measuring sort of photosynthesis and using sort of the electrochemical things happening in plants to actually sort of power and create things. But we wanted to give you just this flavor of, did I get through? I think I got through all of them. This really interesting flavor of people who do strange, unexpected things. And in a way, that's what we're hoping for. It's not that one can't do like purely functional things, but that experimenting with unexpected things might get you to very functional things. And like having this be this institute, and the intentional reason of calling it a festival is that we're not scripting the end. There's a lot of interactions going on and conversations and experimentation. And some things, many of you hopefully will get ideas to go, or people to work with to go off and do something bizarre and crazy and interesting with that might be transformative in both good and bad ways. So that is the lovely thing about technology. It is enchanted, so it's good, but it also can be like dangerous and powerful. So.
Yeah, maybe one more thing on that. I know, when we get excited and we talk about these artists we love, and Nandini touched on this some, is like, there's a lot of hope and a lot of beautiful things and a lot of great ideas, but of course there's also terrible things. Yeah. And so we do want to address those, especially like social impact and civil issues as they relate to these. So we will have those probably a bit more in the augmented storytelling time, but just to plant that in your head, like for every good thing that someone will make using these technologies, people will make terrible things. And so another thing that is our role as the people making them is to like be critical, or maybe even anticipate them and make the terrible thing already and then show everybody that it's terrible or whatever. So just to add that too. So I think that is I think we've hobbled through our slide deck. And so I think we'll probably stop the stream now and then we can just move on to like in-lab logistics. Does that seem okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so Nathan?